I bought the least expensive Nintendo Switch Pro controller on Amazon, and I got it, and I was a little bit surprised when I got this controller in hand. So I wanted to talk about this controller and give it a review and let you guys know if it's really worth saving the money and buying this controller or not. So I definitely think this controller is good for some people, but there are things that you need to know. Let's get into the review. It is definitely worth the $15, and it is a very cheap controller, especially if you are a person that is on a tight budget and you want a different controller other than the Joy-Cons that came with the Nintendo Switch, or if you are a casual player and you don't put in that many hours playing the game. It is a great controller to have. But on the other hand, if you are a more of a big Nintendo Switch player, you play a lot of games, or if you are a more of a competitive gamer and you want the best controller, then obviously this controller won't really do you justice, or you won't be happy with the controller at the end of the day. And especially if you go from the Nintendo Switch Pro controller to this one, you will definitely feel the difference in quality, and you won't be happy with the cheapness or the lack of quality that this controller brings. But I definitely feel like this controller has a specific person in mind. If you are one of those people, I think you'll be definitely happy with the controller. I mean, I know at least I am. So the first thing that I wanted to go over is what comes in the box. And there are only two things that come in the box here, is the controller itself and the charging cable. The charging cable is a USB-C, which plugs into the controller, to a USB to plug into the Switch itself. And this controller is supposed to work with the Nintendo Switch regular and OLED, and also the Switch Lite. And that is a good thing, but I'm not exactly sure why you'd want to use a controller with the Lite version, but if you need to, you can do that. When I first got the controller, I just plugged it into the Switch, and I plugged in the other end to the controller itself, and it didn't seem to just pair automatically. After a little bit of playing around with the controller itself, I figured out a way to go into the system settings on the Nintendo Switch, and then you're going to go under controllers, and then after you're into the controller, then you can pair it that way. And it says this in the small manual that you get with the controller itself, and it also tells on the YCCTeam YouTube channel, which is a big help, because when you get a controller or any kind of accessory for your console, you kind of just want to plug and play, which is a huge reason why you bought a console in the first place. You don't want to be fussing around with it. That was one thing that I first noticed, the pairing process, but it is nice that this controller came with a cable so you can charge it and plug it in and all that. So the ergonomics to the controller is very, very similar to the Pro controller from Nintendo. And as you can see on the box here, that this is a Pro controller. The big kind of thing that when I first saw it as well is like, how did they make this controller like so identical to the original controller, like without copying it or without getting, legal trouble? Because this controller like looks identical to the Pro controller. I mean, they did add a little bit of design. I mean, maybe that helps them get away with the legal issue. Overall form factor, even these thumbsticks are exactly the same. I mean, I can't really notice much of a difference. If you like the Nintendo Switch Pro controller, you really like the feel to it, or you like the shape, then this might be a good controller to get, especially if you want to save some money. But the ergonomics and the feel of this controller is exactly the same as the Nintendo Switch Pro controller. When with this being so cheap, you do feel that it is a little bit lighter to the Pro controller. And for some reason, at least this controller, the buttons seem to be, moving around a little bit, as where the Pro controller doesn't do this at all. you can definitely notice here and there the quality differences, but if you are a casual Nintendo Switch player, or you play games that, you know, like I play Pokemon a lot, and this is perfect for that because, you know, it's not too invasive and you're not doing like first person shooting. You don't have to be quick or anything like that. So it does the job, and you know, it's comfortable to hold and all that. So I like that a lot about this controller. This is a wireless controller. According to Amazon, you are only going to get an 8 to 10 hour battery life out of this controller, which definitely is a little bit low when it comes to wireless controllers. You know, you see generally around the 20-hour mark and up. That is another reason why this controller is a little bit cheaper. You know, the battery life is not going to be as good. That could make or break you depending on how long of a session that you play with a controller. Keep that in mind when purchasing this controller, that the battery life is only 8 to 10 hours. Players were saying that the rumble on this controller wasn't really that good, and they didn't like the way it rumbled, and it was a little bit harsh in the hand. So I was playing Animal Crossing, and I do kind of understand what they're saying. It didn't really bother me too much. If you do play a game that has a lot of rumble, this may bother you, and it may bother you after a while, after it keeps, you know, vibrating over and over and over again. So that is another thing that I wanted to mention about this controller, is that the rumble feature is so-so. This controller has the feature that if you hit the home button, it will wake up the Nintendo Switch. And I heard that some people thought that this controller didn't. At least this new version does do that. If you buy a previous version from YCCTeam, the controller may not have this feature. Just keep that in mind if you are buying this controller. If you are looking for a cheap Nintendo Switch Pro controller, I recently did a wired PDP review of a Switch controller that I really liked with different mappable buttons, and you can check that out right here.